Hello friends, today I'm going to do something a little bit different than what I've been doing on my previous videos. I'm actually going to try a new AI code editor, which is brought to you by Codeium, and it's called Windsurf. I've heard a lot of great things about this, and I'm excited to give it a shot. Like Cursor, this is also a fork of VS Code and has its own custom programming within it as well as extensions. It is capable of using Claude Sonnet 3.5, which of course is my favorite LLM for code editing. It can also use the OpenAI ChatGPT 4o model. Before I download Windsurf and start working on my project, I'm going to take a look at the pricing. And jumping over to the pricing page, it looks like they have a free single seat individual tier. But looking over the features here, it doesn't look like it has everything I need in order to make a fair comparison with Cursor. So I'm going to go ahead and go with the free trial, which is $10 per month and happens to be about $10 per month less than Cursor. So if I find this to be a comparable product, it just could be my new editor of choice. Jumping over to the download page, you can see here that it is available for Linux, which is what I use. I use Fedora 41 Workstation. Let's see what options we have for Linux. This is also, of course, available for Mac and Windows. And it looks like they have a installation for Ubuntu-based distributions, which of course does not include Fedora. So I'm going to have to go with the second option, which is to download the tarball for this. Okay, setting this up was no problem. I just had to do the usual things with downloading and untarring the tarball and setting up the binary and creating an alias to it, and everything is working just fine. And I've launched the application, and this is the first thing I'm presented with, which is a get started message. And it gives me the ability to import settings, it looks like, and possibly extensions from my current installation of VS Code or Cursor. But I'm going to say, I've already got Windsurf in my path, but I'm going to say, let's start fresh. And then it also wants me to select the key bindings. The default is VS Code, but I am a Vim user, so I'm going to select Vim, which is kind of nice. That way I don't have to install the plugin. And then it gives me several theme options here, and I like the default so far. I'm guessing we could probably change this later on. And then now it wants me to log in. So I will go through that process and be right back. The sign up and login process was pretty much uneventful. After completing that, I was redirected back to the application and I landed on this screen here, which looks pretty cool. It gives you a little bit of a getting started guide. It looks like right here, shows you how to open Cascade and also the command palette and a few other things here. So I'm going to go ahead and get the base project set up for this application, and then I'll be back and we will discuss the requirements for it and get going. I am done setting up our project, and like my typical project, I am using Flowbyte for components and Tailwind for the CSS. I'm using a SQLite database, and I'm using Rails 8 authentication. Before I leave this page, I'm going to point out over here in Cascade, on the right-hand side of the page, we have a couple of things I want to point out. We have this model chooser, and you can see in here, there's a Cascade base, which I believe is the model that comes with the free version. We also have Claude 3.5 Sonnet, which I'll be using for most everything, and GPT-4o. And also, we have two different modes. We have the write mode, which is going to allow Windsurf to create and write to files, and then we have the chat mode, which is a read-only mode. Now let's go ahead and open our project. I'm calling the project Vesta, which is after the Roman goddess of wealth. Go ahead and open that up. Okay, it's going to ask me for permission to grant access to all of the files. Kind of interesting that it wants all of the files in the parent folder. But I'm going to go ahead and say I trust the authors. So immediately I am familiar with the Visual Studio Code aspects of this with our little toolbar over here. Of course, all our files. outline timeline down here, and just everything that Visual Studio typically has. Okay, here are the requirements that I'm going to have Windsurf work on today. Like I mentioned, the application is named Vesta named after the Roman goddess of hearth and wealth. It's an application that allows its users to create new investment portfolios and investments within them. An investment can be just about anything, including stock, crypto, art, ETFs, etc. Users can add one or more notes to their portfolios and investments and can add one or more transactions, buy or sell, to an investment. And then within this document, you can see I've outlined the domain models for a portfolio, and also a portfolio is associated to a user, which we already have because of Rails authentication, an investment, transaction, and notes. And the technical requirements are, like I mentioned before, we're using Ruby on Rails version 8, and it goes into how I would like this to be built, including turbo frames and streams. I want it to be a single page application experience. I want to use stimulus controllers for all JavaScript. Styling, of course, is going to be Flowbyte with Flowbyte components and Tailwind CSS. Authentication is pre-configured. I want Flowbyte light dark mode. And then this goes into the functional requirements, but I think at this point you probably understand what we're building, so we're going to go ahead and get started. From the demos I've seen of Windsurf, it's not as critical that you add things to the context as it is with Cursor. So the first thing I'm going to do is ask it what it knows about the project we are working on. And I can see it comes up with this little dialog saying changes are saved to your files. You can continue your workflow or review them here whenever you're ready. So far, this looks pretty impressive. It's basically checked over various files in the project, and it is reading back to me and telling me that this is a modern Rails application using Ruby, Tailwind CSS, Docker support, GitHub Actions, and Kamal. And it has the standard directory structure using modern development tools and practices. It calls out Rubocop for linting, as well as the LSP extension that I've added. Procfile Dev, front-end technologies, Tailwind CSS for styling, Flowbyte docs directory, indicating you might be using Flowbyte UI components. And then it looks over the gem file, and again goes over some of the things it finds here: import maps, Hotwire, Turbo, and Stimulus, SQLite, Puma, Bootsnap, other things through Breakman, Rubocop, Bcrypt, Kamal. So it seems to know a lot about our project already. And so I think I'm just going to try the one-shot attempt. I've committed the code so that if I have to revert this, I can. I'm going to go ahead and paste our requirements. Let's see what I can do. This is in Markdown format. Hopefully that doesn't throw it off. And so it's asking me if I want to run this command. I'm not sure if I need to open the terminal, but I'm going to go ahead and open the terminal in case it needs it. And I'm going to say, yes, let's run it. And okay, it looks like it created the migration okay. And it looks like it's not using the terminal, so it must be doing within its own process. Now it's wanting to create our investment model, and it's creating the migrations. Now the transaction, and it's creating the migrations in the model. Now the note, and now it's analyzing our user model. Hopefully it creates a migration to create the relationship with portfolios. And that's exactly what it has done here. And this is new to me. I'm not sure what this is asking, but I'm assuming we can accept the changes, reject or go between the diff changes there, and then go between the files. So that's kind of cool. So in that case, it was just modifying one file. Gives us the ability to open the diffs, which is kind of cool. So far, I'm pretty impressed with this UI experience here. Within Cascade, it's really verbose about what it's doing, but has nice aesthetics with these little cards that it's displaying here. It calls things out really well. I was going back and doing some analysis on the files it created, which is kind of cool, probably to check its work and to gain that context again and make sure it does the right thing. It's actually making some modifications based on what it found, so that's kind of cool. I'm going to click one of these and just look and see what the diff looks like here. Okay, so I don't know if I need to go back and accept all of these changes along the way here. I may have to do that. I better take a look. That one doesn't appear to be the case. This one does. This one I must have already accepted. Yep, I did. So let's accept that one. Let's accept our transaction. Accept our note. It'd be kind of nice if it had a little indicator here showing you what has been accepted and what hasn't. But I'm okay with that. It does have this that lets you toggle through them, and that seems to work pretty well. And that must mean that we're done with all of them. And so now it's asking us to run the migration command, which it did, and it was successful. And now it's giving us an outline of what it did, created the models and relationships, kind of gives us some specifics there, the database structure, and now it's asking if we want to continue and create the controllers and views, set up the turbo frame structure, implement flow by UI components, add the theme toggle functionality. I'm just going to tell it to continue and let it make its best judgment. It tells me it's starting with the controllers, routes, and initial views for our applications. Let's start with the controllers. And once again, it's got the Rails generate command here for a controller. And now the generate command for the investments controller. And now for the notes controller. Since I asked this to do more of a single page application format, I'm curious how it's going to use all of these controllers to accomplish that. And now transaction controller. It's saying skip template engine. So it seems to be doing the right thing, which is kind of cool. And skip routes. Just going to accept things as it goes here. It doesn't seem to have a diff. This one does have a diff. So it seems to make several passes on the files. Each time it creates something new, I think it must be going back and analyzing what is already there to make sure everything is compatible, which I can appreciate. So these one-shot kind of attempts at creating applications can either go really well or really bad. It can put off the appearance that it's doing an amazing job and end up generating an application that is missing a lot of files and has a lot of bugs. So I'm excited to see what this does. So far, the user experience is fantastic. I would say this is like easily on par with Cursor, maybe even better than Cursor Composer, but the jury's still out on that. I can't judge it until it's done. Creating all of our layout components now, it looks like. I'm assuming I'm just supposed to accept these along the way. It doesn't seem to be complaining about it, so maybe that's right. Next step is to create the portfolio views index from partials, create investment views, set up the models for CRUD, implement dashboard analytics section. Looks like what it did in this pass is our controllers and dark mode support. This is basically our nav bar, flash messages with appropriate styling, the theme controller, stimulus controller for light, dark mode, portfolio selector, and yeah, let's have it continue. Something it seems to be doing, which I think is pretty cool, is it's expanding all of the folders where it's creating files over here in the file tree. And I'm assuming I could probably choose one of these and see the diff if I didn't want to click it here, but it seems I like just working with it here, unless there's a compelling reason to do it over here. Let's make sure I got all of those. It looks like I did. Saying it created the shared components for the stats card portfolio, updated portfolio views, and the show view and form view. Views are fully responsive and support both light dark themes through Tailwind CSS classes. They include proper accessibility attributes. Let me know if you need to make any adjustments to the design and functionality. I'm assuming that means we are done and we can try this out. So I'm going to shrink this view a little bit and open up some space for the editors and the terminal. And I'm going to create a new user. Oh, so this is kind of cool. So it does integrate with the terminal here. I don't know how I did that, but it just popped up with that somehow. I'm sure there's a keyboard shortcut for that. So let's do Rails C. So we have a user. Now I'm going to start it. Start up Puma. While I'm over here, I'm going to open up a second terminal to work on this with. And then, well, before I leave, I'm going to make sure Puma started. And it did. That's a good sign. So we don't have any immediate errors showing up on startup. So let's go over to our browser. Open up a new window and go straight to the login screen. And right out of the gate, we have one error here, and I can see what it is already. It's assumed. I think it assumes we're using Devise or something for authentication, and it's not using the Rails 8 authentication. I'm going to tell it to have a look at the authorization concern and gave it a little bit of a hint saying I think it's trying to use Devise. And it says, you are right. And it kind of cool. It just pulls it up. I just told it where the name of the file. And I think I even gave it the wrong file name. I think I told it authorization concern when I meant authentication concern. But yeah, it's taking a look at the nav bar. It's fixing things. So Windsurf calls this kind of a flow model, and I can see why they call it a flow model. It kind of seamlessly goes back and forth between terminal commands and user input. It seems to flow really well. It seems like I have to give it very few cues in order to get it to do what needs to be done. So far, I'm going to accept that. Let's accept the whole file. Right now, let's go back to the browser and see if we can refresh. And wow, that's interesting. It doesn't look like Tailwind is being applied. Let's just try restarting Puma. And it still looks like it's not being applied. I'm going to go ahead and open up. And I don't see Tailwind CSS in here, so I'm going to have to see if I can figure out what's going on there. Telling it Tailwind's not loading in the browser and asking it to help me diagnose the issue. This is where I start getting a little bit nervous because oftentimes it will go off and try to reconfigure Tailwind instead of seeing if it can fix it. So let's see what it does. So it's analyzing the correct files, which is really cool. And it analyzed the application HTML file. Okay, it wants to look at the package JSON file, but there is no package JSON file. So I'm not sure if I want to reject this. Maybe I'll reject that and say, I'm saying the application doesn't have a package.json file because it is using import maps. And it's taking a look at import map. Okay, so maybe Tailwind wasn't in the application. It's also making some changes to the styles, but we'll accept that. And now it wants to do the bundle install. Again, I think this is super cool that it just runs these commands within its own process over here. And I already ran this earlier, but sure, we'll run it again and see what it does. Apparently something went wrong when I set up Tailwind this time around. Wants to start the server, which I already have running. So now I'm not completely sure if I want the server running within its process, but sure, let's see what it does. It doesn't seem to be running. Maybe it was just looking for an error message or something. So we're going to restart it over here. And it's not saying it's already running. So I think it must have just attempted to run it to check and make sure there were no messages. Cool. Looks like we have pretty much everything I asked for so far. Let's see what happens when I log in. Let's try it without a password, see if I get a message. Oh, I even get an alert here. Okay, we start right out with this error. And again, I think this has to do with it thinking we're using devise. So let's take that, copy it, come back over. I'm giving a little bit of a hint. See, this kind of back and forth is good because it seems to keep the context. It seems to know what it needs to go back and review. And so I can just, again, minimal prompts here. Okay, yep, so far this is correct. So it's fixing this too. And I don't think we've even ran into that problem yet. This seems correct. So let's go ahead and accept all of that. And does that mean we are ready to try it again? And now, okay, this is using email instead of email address. So I just told it it's using the wrong property name for email. And maybe the reason why I'm having it do this instead of me doing it is it might go and find it in other areas and fix it there too, if it does exist. Okay, let's see where we're at now. Okay, we are back to our sign in. It's kind of interesting though, because we're on the sign in page, which is okay actually. We are authenticated because we have our drop down here. We don't have the light dark mode toggle, but we do have a portfolios link over there. But I can have it add the light dark mode. So the first thing we need to do, and it's pretty good looking app so far. I mean, clearly we could make some design improvements. But it's pretty impressive. So we are missing this new template for the portfolio. I'm just going to copy that. Copy. I'm going to say so let's let it generate that new template. And this I think might have been because in the requirements I wasn't very clear about how I wanted to deal with portfolios. In terms of the UI, I was more clear about how to deal with transactions and notes. Context is everything with AI. That is definitely one thing I'm learning along the way. And it says everything has light dark mode support. It says it's just, okay, and so we have this error here. It's just that toggle isn't on there, light dark mode toggle. At least that's what I believe is true. So this experience is pretty consistent with the experience I've had with Cursor when building applications, especially one-shot applications. You go through a few rounds of bug fixing and everything like that, but it's not too bad, honestly. It's like you're spending a half hour or so building an application that's pretty sophisticated. And I expect it to have bugs. I think there are things that AI overlooks in the same way that a human would overlook them, unless you're a better programmer than I am. Okay, we are still getting an error. It's a different error, so let's have it work through this. Okay, it's going to remove the drop down from the nav bar if you're already on the new page, which is kind of cool. It made that observation. I'm not sure if that's why we had the error. Maybe it was. You can see Rails over here rebuilding when these changes are made. Okay, accept all. Okay, this is cool. So let's give our new portfolio a name. And we are one step further. Let's take this one. Okay, it probably had a root level route for portfolio notes, and it needs to be nested. It's doing a pretty good job of fixing these problems without me having to adjust the context or create a whole new chat. Sometimes I find myself doing that because the LLM gets confused, and so I just start over. But so far, it feels like we're on the same page. It is marching in step with me. Okay. And portfolio was successfully created. Let's see if we have our portfolio, and we do. And look at that. That is a nice looking dashboard. Has everything that I asked for. It came up with some metrics to put at the top of the page, number of notes, investments, total value on the portfolio. We have breadcrumbs up here, edit portfolio, delete portfolio, add investment, add note. Let's try the easy one. Let's add a note. And it looks like it saved it. Let's go back to the portfolio page. And it did. So we have a new note. Boy, do we dare add an investment. Okay, we got the same issue here that we handled before. I hope I didn't give it too much context there. Actually, it might confuse it. Sometimes if you're ambiguous when you give it a prompt, you create more problems for yourself. So hopefully that's not the case. Oh no, it knew it. It's the Rails 8 authentication pattern we implemented earlier. Oh, it's going to do that with the transactions, did it with the investments already, so that's good. So it recognized possibly that we fixed this before on the original controller, and now it's going through and fixing the other controllers. Okay, now we're missing the show, or no, this is the new for the investment. Let's let it do its thing and create this template. And the form, partial, and the new template. And investment type. I'm not sure what it called our investment type, but there's probably an inconsistency there between the view and the model. So it's generating a migration. We'll run the migration. And now it's summarizing the changes it made. Okay, it created a constant for our investment types. And there we go. We now have a form. And we have an investment. So we have this investment show page, which I think what I'm going to have it do is just go back to the dashboard. In fact, I'm going to copy this and I'm going to have it do it now while it's thinking about it. Let's accept that. So let's select our portfolio. Okay. I love how it manages its own context here. It knows when it needs to go back and reread files. Okay, shallow equals true on the route, so it picked that up, which I think is pretty cool. And there you have it. We have an investment, the units, unit price, and total value because we don't have any transactions on it. So now we go back to the investment show. Shows it in two spots. I don't really think we need it on any of these pages if it's in the header, but we can fix that later. That's not that big of a deal. So we can add the investments, but we don't have a way of adding transactions. Let's check our edit portfolio. Let's fix this real quick. I'm just going to fix some of these other pages and then we'll come back to transactions. Even though it's not using modal dialogues, it seems to be using Turbo. So it's really responsive. You're not seeing the full page refreshes or anything like that, which I think is pretty cool. Might even be acceptable, honestly. Maybe it creates less clutter, a better experience for the users, and probably ends up looking better on mobile anyway. But I'll make that decision a little later on. Okay, edit portfolio. The portfolio only has one attribute, which is the name, so that should be okay. Got two cancel buttons here. Once again, not a big deal. Now I am on the portfolios. It looks like show page. To get rid of this and just go back to the IRA. The most important thing here is I need the ability to add transactions that I will need. I'm not going to delete the portfolio because I don't want to start over. I'm not going to delete a note. I don't want to be able to delete investments. I want to think about maybe archiving those down the road, but for now I didn't tell it to do anything with that. we may end up needing the show page for an investment because it's going to have its own notes and it's going to have its own transactions, and that might be a little bit too much to put on this dashboard, which I think will be fine. So far, it seems to be doing a pretty good job of allowing us that opportunity and allowing us to refactor it based on our findings as we use the app. Okay, this time it looks like it's creating a modal for adding a transaction, which I think is fine for adding the transaction, maybe preferable. Actually modifying the portfolio show. So it is taking a different approach to this. Oh no, the portfolio show is actually what I'm calling the dashboard. So yeah, it is adding the modal there. And it gives me the details. I'm sure if I read that, I might be able to better understand exactly how it's doing things and why, but I'm not. So we do have our add transaction, and it does pop up a modal dialog this time. And I can say I want to buy, and it sets the date to the current date, the quantity, I want to buy 100 of them, and the price per unit, I'm going to say is 10. This will just make the math easier. Well, let's go 15. So enter any notes about the transaction. Yeah, I'm going to add a note. Okay, and current user.investments.find. So I'm not sure what it's calling it. Okay, there is no user investments. That's actually linked to the portfolio. So let's go back and say, but it may not be bad to have transactions linked to a user. I'm not sure where it's going with that. Okay, it's telling me exactly what I just said. The investments belong to portfolios, not directly to users. Let's update the set investment method to the transactions controller. Okay, easy enough. Refresh that. And let's view this. Okay, so we don't have a way of showing the transactions. Let's try one more though. Okay, transactions.build a known attribute quantity for transaction. Okay, so the names are clearly off there. Sometimes when I'm using AI like this, it feels so human to me that I feel like I need to give it encouragement along the way. I'm not sure why that is. Okay, so we created a new migration. Run our migration. No, we got an error. Let's see if it picks up that we got an error. Okay, it did. This is cool. So it created, caused an error, and it actually picked up that there was an error, and now it's reanalyzing our schema to see exactly what it did wrong. Doing another migration, notes to transaction. So this is something I debated on, but I think when I created the model for the transaction, I just had a single note for it and not a relationship to the notes table. But I debated on having a relationship to the notes table just to keep all the notes in one place. And it looks like it's doing that. Apparently, it has an opinion on that. And it went in the other direction, which I'm fine with. Added the missing notes field to the transactions table. I will take it. And so now, let's see if we're going to add another transaction. By okay, transaction was successful. Now I have no way of viewing the transactions. I don't know if we want to be able to add that in two places. Maybe modify. I mean, I'm rethinking even having the transaction and add transaction, but maybe it's not a bad shortcut to have that on the dashboard or the portfolios page. So it's attempting to create the file which was already there, but it picked that up, and then it's analyzing what's there. So it's gone through a couple of iterations of editing this show page for the transactions. So hopefully it's not in a loop. Okay, it took a few attempts at editing that, but it did come up with the changes that we need, or at least that it thinks we need. Okay, we have a buy transaction, total value. It looks like it didn't pick up all of our transactions, but that's okay. But we also have an add transaction here. This is kind of cool. Our breadcrumbs. Yeah, I'm actually kind of okay with this not being all on a single page, actually. It seems like it might be a little too much. But I like the little summary here of our investments. But it is kind of nice to be able to go to this detail. This is kind of a nice little shortcut to add a transaction, though. Let's buy some more of that. Let's buy 10 at $12. And transaction was successful. Let's view, and yep, we do have two transactions there. Portfolio value is now up to 250. So yeah, everything looks pretty good here, actually. If I go to the portfolios, okay, this looks like it's going to probably, if I create another portfolio, I'm guessing it's going to start creating cards and kind of wrap them left to right. Let's see how it responds. Speaking of that, to mobile, okay, it seems to be responsive. There are clearly some things that could be improved here, but overall, this is actually pretty impressive. Yeah, this has got to go here, and the light and dark mode isn't here, which I need to have added in. Let's add a second one in here, and let's say this is a brokerage account. Okay, now we have a brokerage account, so we should have two in here. And we're looking at our brokerage account, which has nothing. Looks good. Investment, add notes, delete portfolio. I'm going to ask it just to see if it can implement the light and dark mode. But before I do that, since we're at a pretty good stopping point, I'm actually going to commit my changes just in case it goes south on me. See, I like that it just seems to know our context. Normally, if I was using Cursor, I would start adding files to the context, like the navbar partial. And in this particular case, it seems to be doing the right thing. So it's looking at the theme controller it created. It's analyzing our application HTML ERB. It's probably going to hopefully analyze our navbar. Yep, exactly. The theme toggle button is already in the navbar, but navbar. Okay, so it says it's there. I don't see it though. Well, made quite a few changes there. There we go. That's cool, but we lost our drop down, which is kind of interesting. But you know what? At this point, I don't know that I care because there's really nothing in there other than log out. So that is looking pretty amazing. Let's take a look at a portfolio. Let's go to the brokerage account. Let's go to our IRA. This table's just because of the resize of the screen. I'm not sure how responsive this app is. It's fairly responsive, but not perfect. But I think that is a good stopping point. There are just a few things that I'd like to fix on this to make the experience a little bit better, like getting rid of one of these drop downs. We don't need both of them. And there's some other changes with buttons that are stacked and some of the dialogues and everything like that. But overall, I'm going to have to say that this experience has been great. I'm going to use this Windsurf for a while instead of Cursor and see if I like it better. Because honestly, at this point, I think that experience was probably better than any experience I've had with Cursor yet, building a application in one shot. It doesn't mean that my day-to-day development is going to be a better experience with Windsurf, but I'm willing to give it a try. And if that's the case, then maybe Windsurf might be my new editor. Thank you all for watching this video. If you like the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you like the content I'm producing, please subscribe to my channel. I really would appreciate that. And we will see you in the next one.